So let's talk about that for a minute, kind of this idea of, does it make sense to apply this year or does it make sense to wait? And I'm curious how you think about that decision or how you advise clients.
Yeah. We've talked about this a lot on team meetings and everything. And I think I've actually heard you say it's a little bit of like, will you get more in the next year? Or will you actually just look like you're doing more of the same? So I think there's that break point. There's a point where an extra year is additive. And I think that's usually, typically, if you're only 2 years, 3 years into your professional experience, another year is a substantial chunk of time, and you are likely to have rich experiences during that year. But when you're maybe 6 or 7 years into your career at the same company and you look forward, if something's not changing, you need to be applying now, because otherwise it's just going to start signaling perhaps the wrong indications about your motivation, about your drive, about your ambition. So that's one thing, is I really ask clients to think about, what do they anticipate to grow, or how do they anticipate to grow in the next year? When it comes to extracurriculars, look, I think they are incredibly important. I typically do not suggest waiting just because of extracurricular. It would also have to be, again, that you're going to get step-up opportunities at work, or you can create them yourself. So one way or the other, you are making, if you're waiting for another year, you're making the most of it. But if you're just not confident you're going to get it, I would say apply this year. I mean, obviously, it's going to depend if they're ready and everything.
How much are you going to gain in that extra year? Are you going to be promoted? Will you have new responsibilities? Can you raise your hand for some new things?
Yeah.
I think the other thing you kind of alluded to, but is like goals, right? So sometimes clients aren't clear on their goals. It's really hard to go through the application process without knowing what that is.
Yeah.
But maybe an extra year will help the client clarify that. Or maybe they've recently gotten a sense of what they want their goals, what their goals are, but they haven't quite connected to them yet in what they've been working on. So, is there an opportunity to raise your hand at work for a deal or a project that ties into your goals? Even though you're maybe not progressing your career, that to me would be a great use of a year of time. And I think the other thing we talk about sometimes is the test. Not that you want to delay simply because you don't have a test, but if you start to have a number of ways, even if they're all kind of minor, where a number of ways that you could use that year. So it's to take the test, it's to bulk up your kind of extracurriculars, it's maybe to take on additional experience at work, then that starts to be the accumulation of enough things that actually waiting a year might make a lot of sense.
I remember I had a client a few years ago. I loved her. She's great. And we worked all summer long, into the fall, throughout early winter on her essays. She could not get her GRE where it needed to be. And she was a 4.0 student, maybe not 4.0, but a top student. And her job was a little off the beaten track. So she couldn't necessarily rely on her job to prove her skills. And she had the GPA, but it wasn't, the school was good, but it might not be, wasn't an Ivy League, say, which again, just is another thing to consider. So she, at the last minute, she decided she was going to punt until the following year. And she hustled all spring and early summer on that test. She finally got a score. She was so proud. She called me. She's like, I got it. Let's go. And at that point, she had done all the work. She had a stellar resume. We had worked on all her essays. She had to do a little fine tuning, bring it up to speed. But, she just graduated, I think, last year from Wharton. She completely pivoted her career. She's in investment banking, doing a great job. And she made the right call because I am confident with the score she had, she would have never had the opportunities that she did. So sometimes you're right. It's definitely, as much as we hate to say it, I hate to say hold off because of the test, it can be the right place, right time, the right strategy.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, you kind of mentioned Wharton, I think it depends a little bit how flexible maybe somebody is on their school list. So we work with, clients who have different views of, I want a seat or I only want, a couple of specific schools. And it's not right or wrong to take one approach versus the other. But if you are really, kind of super focused maybe on the M7 or the top of the M7, having that test score is really crucial. And actually having all these pieces, right? Having the extracurriculars and the work experience. Whereas if you maybe are, a little bit more flexible with your school list, then it's a little bit easier to have sort of an Achilles heel or a bit of a weakness somewhere.
Yeah. So as you can see, it's such a great area. And as one of our colleagues, Brooke, she always says, when you apply, it actually depends. There's no one right answer, but the answer is just going to depend on your situation. So if you're contemplating when makes the most sense, definitely reach out to Gatehouse. We can help you think through how much that next year is going to add or whether or not you've got a shot in going for it this year.